Hello, and welcome to Productivity in Prose, a podcast about making the most of your writing time and honing your craft. Whether you're a seasoned author or a new writer, this podcast offers helpful tips to maximize your writing time, increase your writing productivity, and tackle the sometimes tough aspects of the writer life. Hi, I'm your host, Emily, author of Suspended in the Stars, among other things, and today's topic is unique challenges to writing a book 2 and how to deal with the emotional side to publishing. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. This episode will be a little different than my others in that it's going to be a bit more freeform. I've got some bullet points I want to hit that will be included in the script for this show, but I wanted to leave myself open to share more freely about the emotional side to publishing. First, I did want to share some things I've learned from working on a second book in the series. I will caveat this by saying I am specifically talking about my young adult science fantasy book, Falling Through the Black. There will be no spoilers, but I share this to give context. The second book in a more epic saga type of series is going to present different challenges than writing the second book to a sweet romance series, and I can say this from experience. Another thing to note here is that this is my first second book in a series, and what I mean by that is that Falling Through the Black is part of a trilogy, and while I have written second books in other series for my sweet romance pen name, it's not the same because it featured different characters and the stakes were a little different. Rather than focusing too much on the mechanics, though, I want to take a look at the emotional side and how that could affect a writer and how it's affected me. Well, I wouldn't say these are in any kind of specific order, but the first thing that I have noticed with working on the second book in my series is that the pressure is big and it's sometimes paralyzing. For a little bit of context for those who may not know, last March, I ran my first Kickstarter and produced Suspended in the Stars, which is book 1 in this series. It went really well, and I was able to deliver the books to my Kickstarter backers before the book was released wide, which basically means you could buy it anywhere. It was such a fun experience, and I had so many people kind of come alongside me through that process. Running a Kickstarter is very personal. It's very different than just releasing a book. I wouldn't say that it's any better or any worse. It's just a different kind of aspect to it, I guess. So that when I did release the book in November of 2023, I had to do it all over again, right? So it was a whole roller coaster, and I'm gearing up to head into that again this year with my next Kickstarter, which is why I'm talking about book 2 here. But all of that to say, the pressure I have felt has been something unlike any writing experience I've had so far. Perhaps it's because this was the first book in a series that I was so excited about, and it's a little more close to the passions of my heart than some of my other books, that it matters more to me. Or maybe it's just that it's gotten a little bit wider spread of appeal than some of my other books. I don't know, honestly, what the real thing is there, but I will say that it's like nothing else I've experienced. I care so much about what people will think of the second book that has become almost like an insurmountable mountain that I have to climb. And that kind of leads me into the next thing, which is the mind games aren't great. And what I mean by this is don't read the reviews if you're prone to falling prey to this. Now, I don't really read my reviews as a rule. I don't like negative comments. I mean, who does? I get that. I know some writers who will go out there and dig up their 1-star reviews and post them, and they laugh about it and whatnot. And I am like, more power to you if you can do that. That is not me. I think at the core of who I am as a creative is I'm sensitive. And I think that that's an asset to not only my writing, but me as a person. I am a wing 2, I'm an Enneagram 2 wing 1. And I think that makes me someone who looks for, ways to help others and to be very intuitive and things like that. And so maybe you could extrapolate that to book writing, and I want to write a book that I know is going to make people feel a certain way and love it a certain way. And then if they don't, then I feel like I've messed up, right? Now, I would say overwhelmingly, the response has been positive. I am blessed, as of the recording of this, to have 40 reviews on Amazon, and Like, it's got a good star rating, and I'm like so thankful for that. And I'm going to put a plug in here. Sorry, but if you've read Suspended in the Stars and you have not yet left a review, could you do that? It sounds so silly, but I do have the goal of hitting 50 reviews by my birthday, which is July 2nd. And then by the end of the year, I'd like to hit 100 reviews. It's a big goal, but who knows? I'd love to get there. So anyways, back to what we're talking about. Because I am prone to what I'm calling mind games, which is basically me warring with myself saying, you can't write and you're terrible and nobody's going to like this book. Shelter yourself from that. What that may look like if you need to pull blurbs for your book or for graphics or whatever is asking a trusted friend to do that for you. I don't need to hear the negative things people say about my book. I really don't. And I don't say that arrogantly because I do want to say that I am open to critique, but I am open to critique in a wise way, or at least I try to be, which means that I accept it from people who A, I trust, B, who I know have my best interests and who understand the story, and then C, people who are doing it in a kind way that I can receive. And that might sound a little like, I don't know, thin-skinned, but maybe that's just who I am, and I'm going to accept that because that's just the type of writer that I am. So the next point I thought of is that the anticipation is fun of like getting this book out, but it can also be overwhelming. I'm someone that loves some good hype, and I don't necessarily mean that about books because sometimes hyped books are not my favorite, but I mean in the sense of like I get excited about releasing book 2 and I'm excited about the Kickstarter and I'm excited about all these things. But what tends to happen for me, and which might be something that you fall prey to in the future, is that you overly focus on the anticipation and let that lock you up. It makes me not want to sit down and work on the book because all I can think of is everything else I have to do or all of the fun things I'd rather get to instead of like the hard work of making sure that what I'm writing is good. So that's maybe a niche thing for me, but that is just something that I deal with, and maybe that's just part of my personality. I don't know. But I really have to push through that and kind of tell myself, Emily, you need to get to work. You need to stop doing all the fun stuff, like the design stuff is easy and fun, but instead like do the hard work of like, is this plot arc working? That type of thing. Something I think you should also realize is that things are going to get complex. And this might be more specific for epic fiction of any kind, but specifically now, as we drill down into just talking about writing a book 2 in a series, you have to realize that there are certain arcs that we see in a trilogy. And I am not going to go into this deeply here because I don't know that I'm the best person to do that, but I also don't want to make this too technical. I kind of want to keep it at a bird's eye view. As you're looking at the format of maybe a 3-book series, it's going to differ drastically from a duology. It's going to differ even more drastically from maybe a 5-book series or a 10-book series. But there are things that tend to happen in a book 2 that I, as a reader, have noticed I don't like. Some of this is structural, and it might just be something that is taught in MFA programs that I have not attended. So I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert. But what I tend to see is that book 2 gets dark, book 2 gets heavy, and usually it's emotionally weird. If you've got a romance that spans all 3 books, maybe there's a breakup. Again, I'm not talking specifically about my book. I'm just saying in general. You have this expanding world, so the tone is different, and you tend to have things that are kind of drawn out, or you can. I think a well-written book 2 will not only expand the world, but it will also draw you deeper in to kind of the buy-in that you have for the end result, which is going to happen in book 3, right? So for me specifically now, working on this second book, things are different. Again, I don't want to do spoilers because I know that there are a lot of people who have read book 1 and they're curious about book 2. So I will say this, there are more points of view, which I have shared that widely. And the challenge with that is balancing everything. It's no longer just these 2 characters as they go about their adventure through the galaxy and their romance. It's not just about that anymore. And it is me showing more of the world, which would be my galaxy as the setting. So it's just a lot to handle, and it is more complex. I'm going to give a mini shout out to next week's episode, which is planning out a series. I say that here because I'm not going to tell you how to plot a series. I think that would be a very different and much longer episode. But I am going to drill down on things that I think you can do to help yourself when you get into these more complex sections of your writing. This will work for whether you're writing a sweet romance or an epic fantasy. The next thing I thought of is that you're going to second guess yourself. And it's true. I have second guessed myself so many times during the process of writing this book. I'm still maybe second guessing myself. And I just wanted to say that out loud here because it's okay. Like, it's going to be okay, and it's all going to work out in the end. It's just there's usually points in your writing. Sometimes maybe it's from the beginning until the end of your first draft, or maybe beyond that, where you're going to wonder, is this the best that it could be? I'll kind of give a weird example here, something that I have shared with other people as well, especially those who are interested in starting new businesses. Hear me out. It will translate back to writing. When I was first starting my photography business, this was back in 2011, I was so nervous. I am such a perfectionist, and I wanted to make sure that the people who were hiring me and paying me hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to photograph their weddings were getting what they wanted out of my services. Something that I kind of just stumbled upon in my own mind, I guess. I don't know. I didn't hear it from anyone else. I didn't read it anywhere. I just realized that as I put up a Facebook account at that point, this is, 2011, I showed all the images that I had taken thus far, at least the ones that I thought were like my best pictures. And I sent people there basically when they were asking about my services, because my revelation was this: if someone likes what they see here on this artboard or whatever, this photo album, they're going to get at least that quality from me or something better. As an artist and a creative, I challenge myself each day, each writing session, or at that point, each next photography session to do my absolute best or better. And so I've taken that with me into the second book, in that if I have readers who enjoyed book one, more than likely they're going to enjoy book two. Now, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to agree with all the choices that I make, that they're going to be on board with everything that I write, or that I'm going to keep every single reader happy that goes from book one to book two. That's hard for me to accept as a perfectionist and a people pleaser. But it does help me because it shows me that I am only going to continue to grow in my craft as long as I am putting in the same amount of effort or more. And I think the same can be true for any writer or any creative. It's not a guarantee, but it does help me. And then one more thing I wanted to highlight, as I've just been thinking through like the unique challenges that I've faced in writing a book too, is that if you can use the same editor from your first book for your second book and hopefully your third, that's going to be life-saving. There's something to be said about someone who has gone through the process with you of working and honing and refining your first book, who's then going to step into your second book. The same thing also can be said for your beta readers. Make sure that they're people who are fans of your story or of your series. Make sure that they understand also clearly what you're asking for when you're sending them your book to read as like a beta reader. Because sometimes there's going to be things that an author does, maybe not sometimes, probably all the time. There will be things that an author does in a book, maybe especially a book too, that doesn't logically fit in with what your reader wants to see. But you have to remember, an author has a bird's eye view of the whole series, right? So there are just some things that happen, I would say, especially in a book two, that set up things for book three that may just not be your favorite thing, but I say stick with it to the end. And maybe that's more specifically my series. I don't know. But yeah, back to the point is, if you can, make sure you set up that time with your editor so that they're going to keep things consistent and they're going to help you hone your story as best as possible, which then I think will kind of feed into helping you feel a little more confident and helping to kind of get rid of those mind games and the pressure that you're feeling. Speaking of pressure, I did want to take some time to touch on the emotions of publishing. Some of you may have read the title of this episode and thought, I'm not writing a second book, I don't need to listen to this. And that might be right, but I would like to say here that there is a lot about the book industry that you don't know until you experience it. I wouldn't say I've experienced it all. I know I haven't, but I do know a lot more than I did when I first started. Remember, the goal of this podcast is to share as openly as I can about those things with you, which is why I'm talking about emotions in this episode. Some of them may be a bit of a repeat from the first half, but I do think that they bear repeating. And one of the first things is that you're going to wonder if you're good enough. I think that that is across the board. I think New York Times bestselling authors and new independently published authors all have this same thought. I wouldn't say it's everyone, but probably most of us have thought, am I good enough? Is this book good enough? And to deal with that emotion, you have to go back to your passions. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast because I think it's easy to let our motivation slip or to let the hardships blind us from the reason why we started writing in the first place, which was that passion. You're going to think your writing stinks. Oh my goodness. I cannot tell you how many times I've told my writing group within the last month how awful this recent book that I was working on was. And this is not book 2, it's a different story. But I honestly hated what I was writing, and thankfully I got to a place where I don't hate it now. But at the time, it was just so rough. I really think the only way to get past that is to just keep writing. And the next one is that you're going to want to quit, probably. And so these kind of go together because I think when you are in a creative atmosphere and you are producing things from your heart and your soul, and maybe you're facing rejection or maybe people aren't buying your book, whatever that looks like, you're going to want to step back. That's the last thing that I think you should do. Well, let me caveat that. I do think you should take a break if you need it. I do believe in rest. I believe in, taking a Sabbath from your writing if you need to, but really assess, is it everyone else's emotions that are playing on you, or is it something you truly believe about yourself? Do you truly believe that your recent book is bad or whatever, or is it just other people telling you that or showing you that by not purchasing it? There's a multitude of reasons why people might not be purchasing your book. Maybe that's something I should talk about later in another episode, but don't let that be something that makes you quit. And the last one in this little category here is that you're going to be anxious about what your readers think, and that's okay. I've mentioned this already in just how I'm facing book 2, but I tend to think about my readers quite frequently, especially when I'm about to jump into a writing session. And that's maybe the worst time that I should think about them, because what that comes down to is me letting other people's desires or hopes or dreams or comments or whatever slip in and start messing around with what I've already set in place and what I already know to be true about my book. Now, it's okay for your readers to have thoughts about your book. 100% it is. And it's okay for them not to like it as well. Your book is not going to be for every reader. But when you're writing, that's not a time to consider anyone else's opinions, at least for your first draft. That's the time for you to really hone in on what it is that you're writing and what you're creating. Let that space be almost sacred in a sense, so that you can truly pour out your best into those words. My friend Kristen loves to remind me that it's okay to write crap on your first draft. And I do believe that, for a first draft at least. But I think the heart of that is really getting your internal editor out of the way and writing what you think you need to get out. I still think that that can be a beautiful process. So hold to that, not what all these other outside things are trying to make you think about or distract you by. I wanted to leave you with 3 last things that I think you can put in place to help you when the emotional side of publishing is just too overwhelming. The first thing is you will need writer friends and a good support system to be a published author. Whether that's independent, traditional, hybrid, whatever, you need those people around you that you can turn to for support, for encouragement, and for those times when you're just I feel like I'm a terrible writer, and they can say, hey, you've written these books. I've read your writing. You're not a terrible writer. Or maybe you haven't published anything yet, but they've read your writing. Whatever that looks like, make sure you have these people in your corner, especially for those dark times when you do face the rejection or you are lacking sales or whatever that looks like. The second thing is you need to hold tight to your passion and why you write. I mean, this really is key. I think the last thing I'm going to say is also key, but this thing to me is like, this is your kernel. This is, I think of it like a robot. Of course I would because of space, but it's that internal processing unit that's within you. Man, I'm really taking this out. But if you're a robot, you could have everything else destroyed around you. You could miss some arms and some legs or whatever. And I would say that's basically like getting rejected or, your book's not getting reviewed well or whatever. But as long as you have that key kernel within you that reminds you daily why you write, why you're doing what you're doing, then bring on the destruction, right? Bring it on because you're going to fight through it. I realize that is so much easier for me to say sitting here behind my microphone when I'm not maybe facing something like you are, whether it's rejection or not being able to find time to write or not being able to sell your book, whatever that looks like. I get it. I get that it's hard. But when you face that, you need to come back to that why. You need to come back to the passion that you have for story, for the dreams that you had as a child about being a writer, for the experience that sparked your imagination and gave you that first story idea. Whatever it is that is your why, have that. Come back to it and let it reinvigorate you when you're just down in the trenches. And then finally, you'll need to be tenacious. This honestly might be the hardest one yet because you're going to get beat down. And I don't care whether you are a multi-published author or you're someone who is thinking about being a writer and you're not even sure if you can write. Both of those situations and everywhere in between, all of us writers are going to face adversity. And remember, the true test of a writer is the person who keeps writing. So whatever that looks like, if you need to take time out, do it. If you need to search out your friends and have them support you and encourage you, do that too. Or if you need to switch genres or switch styles or write by hand instead of writing by computer or write in the park instead of writing in your basement like me, whatever that looks like, do what you need to do to shake things up and get back into that groove of writing. If it's an emotional reason why you've had a hard time coming back to your project or starting a new project, you might need to talk it out with someone. From my own experience, I have found the most support and encouragement first from my friends and my family, and then from reading good books and watching good shows. It reminds me just how powerful story can be and why I want to be a part of that. I can't force you to be tenacious, and honestly, there's nothing that I can say that will make you want to be tenacious as a writer. At least I don't think there is. But if you need to hear it from me, you can do this. You can. It might take longer than you think it will. It might be harder than you think it should be, but you can pursue your passions to be a published author, and you have what it takes. A final note here on just the emotional side to publishing. Friends, it's a roller coaster. Some days you'll be elated because you finished a proposal and sent it in. And then maybe 6 months later, you might be the complete opposite of that because your hopes didn't see fruition like you thought that they would. The key things that I've held on to as a writer, aside from what I've already said, which would be my passion and having a support system and just being really ruthlessly tenacious in my writing, have been something that I think you're going to maybe laugh at. But honestly, it's been my characters. No, that's not the only thing that's kept me writing, but honestly, thinking about the stories that I have to tell and who will read them, hopefully in the future, has hugely inspired me to keep at it. Yes, those characters are demanding their stories to be told, and so I listen to them. And then I would say the last thing for me is writing a story that readers want to read and that encourages them. And that might just be a book that they love to read and enjoy because it's entertaining, and I am totally okay with that. I may not have any great kind of themes or any wisdom to impart, but if you've enjoyed my books while you're reading them, that to me is a win. If you are someone who is not published yet and you think, well, I don't have readers to spur me on, then think about those future readers. Who do you want to touch with your stories? Whose life do you want to impact through what you're going to tell? Let that be motivation for you to keep at it. And if you're wondering how to balance a busy schedule and your writing life, then take a look at episode 8 where I talked about that very thing. Next week, as I've already said, I'll be talking about planning out a series and a few things that you can do to set yourself up for success. Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to dream big and write boldly. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. If you're looking for more writing inspiration, community, craft tips, and behind-the-scenes content, consider joining the EAH Coalition on Patreon with various levels of free and paid support. You can also connect with me on Instagram at CreateExploreRead and find out more about me, my books, and my design business on my website, eahcreative.com. Productivity in Prose is an EAH Creative production.